Curious Lloyd.
Modern-day technology makes it pretty difficult for a person to drop off the face of the earth. We leave such large digital footprints everywhere we go that if you suddenly stop tweeting or Facebooking, a lot of people are going to notice pretty soon. But that wasn't always the case. People vanishing forever used to be as simple as leaving your home without telling anyone or hiding in your girlfriend's house or boyfriend's house, resulting in a whole mess of confusion when you showed up again years later, completely oblivious to how everyone thought you were pretty much dead and may or may not have replaced you with an entirely different person. But in this video, I shall talk about these 5 missing person cases that are really weird. A missing child is mistakenly taken away from his mother and given to the wrong family. In 1912, 4-year-old Bobby Dunbar vanished during a trip with his wealthy family at Swayze Lake in Louisiana. Hundreds of volunteer rescuers scoured the swamp, dissecting alligators and dynamiting the waters in hopes of uncovering little Bobby's body, but failed to turn up anything. Thankfully, 8 months later, the Dunbar family received some shockingly good news. A child resembling Bobby had been found in Mississippi, traveling in the company of a drifter named William Cantwell Winters. Winters had claimed the boy was his nephew, Bruce, the son of his brother and family servant named Julia Anderson. However, the Dunbar family became convinced that Bruce was their missing Bobby. He had a burn scar on his left foot, just like Bobby, as well as a similar mole. Julia Anderson, for her past, stubbornly insisted that Bruce was her son. Historically, disputes over the parenthood of the child are resolved by using empirical evidence, but the court skipped the whole evidence thing and awarded custody to the boy to the Dunbars. Winters was charged with kidnapping and went to prison, but his conviction was soon overturned on technicality. Bobby Dunbar was returned home, where his family continued to raise him. He eventually had children of his own and lived a full happy life until his death in 1966. The thing is, it wasn't really his life. As the 21st century rolled around, one of Bobby's grandchildren decided to research the case and concluded that something was a little off about the whole thing. She convinced her father, Bobby Dunbar Jr., to take a DNA test, the results of which revealed that, as you can guess, he had no genetic connection to the Dunbar family. Bobby Dunbar had in fact been Julia Anderson's son Bruce, and he had lived there for the last 5 decades of his life as the wrong person. So that means William Winters was convicted for a non-existent crime. Julia Anderson had her biological son stolen away from her, and the fate of the real Bobby Dunbar will remain a mystery forever. A missing father turns up years later as a TV host. In 1957, Lawrence Bada, an amateur archer and Akron-based cookware salesman, ignored severe storm warnings and took a boat on Lake Erie. When his boat was discovered the next day damaged, missing an oar, and without Bada in it, it didn't take a genius to figure out what had happened. Clearly, he had gotten tossed overboard in the storm and killed. Rescuers searched the lake, but never found him. Bada left behind him 3 children and a pregnant wife who received $40,000 in life insurance, a princely sum in exchange for a dead patriarch in the 50s. 8 years later, a family friend was in Chicago when he encountered a man who looked eerily like Lawrence Bada. The doppelganger was John Fritz Johnson, a well-known radio and television personality in Omaha, Nebraska. Some of his notable endeavors, including announcing pro wrestling matches and winning 13 archery titles, which was a favorite hobby of Bada's. Fritz Johnson insisted that he was not Bada. He claimed that he was raised in an orphanage and served 14 years in the Navy before moving to Omaha, where he had left a wife and 2 children. So he made it positive that he was not Lawrence Bada, but he did agree to take a fingerprint test to put everyone's mind at ease. To his own apparent astonishment, Johnson's fingerprints were a perfect match for Bada's. Johnson's life fell apart almost immediately. His wife annulled their marriage. He lost his television job. Bada's reappearance also caused problems for his first wife. His newfound aliveness meant the insurance company wanted their money back. Johnson maintained that he had no memory of his former life as Bada, and that he had a strange case of amnesia, and had also implanted false memories in his head. It is a bit strange that a man would submit to taking a fingerprint test if he was consciously lying about his identity. But Bada was in a huge amount of financial trouble leading up to his disappearance. He was heavily in debt and had a spot in the IRS for not paying his taxes for years. Add that to the fact that he had a mortgage and a large life insurance policy, and it's easy to see why he would have faked a drowning to abandon his life in Akron as a cookware salesman to become a popular local television personality. Bada's family believed there was something wrong with him, but he cunningly died of cancer before psychiatrists conclusively determined what would happen to him. A murdered man shows up to testify at his killer's trial. In 1929, a man named Connie Franklin drifted into St. James's, Arkansas, but into the heart of a 17-year-old named Tilly Reminer. Everything seemed great until the night they rode off to get married. When Franklin disappeared, everyone probably assumed that Franklin had bailed on the marriage and run off, but several months later, Reminer went to the county sheriff with a shocking story. She reported that on their wedding night, she and Franklin were attacked by 4 local men who tortured Franklin and burned him alive, then assaulted her and intimidated her into staying silent for months, as well as a corroborating witness. So the 4 men Reminer accused were arrested and charged with the murder. The thing is, the thing that didn't make sense was the defense star witness, Connie Franklin. Now you see, a man claiming to be Connie Franklin showed up very much alive after the supposed murder. He said that he'd gotten drunk with his wife and the 4 defendants the night of the wedding had fallen off a mule, which was a perfectly acceptable alibi in a rural Arkansas in 1929. The following morning, Reminer allegedly told him she didn't want to get married anymore, so he left the town voluntarily. Normally, a man testifying in this trial of his murder would be a very strong evidence that everyone should go free, but this was 1929, an era before every human being had a mobile phone, of full identifying photographs, and a lifetime documentation backing them up, proving that you are who you say you are. The prosecution therefore maintained that the newly discovered and decidedly unmurdered Connie Franklin was an imposter. So the court ordered a fingerprint check, which revealed that the newly alive Connie Franklin was actually a guy named Marion Franklin Rogers, who escaped from a mental hospital years earlier. Now, this is in no way proof that he was also the Connie Franklin in question, but it didn't prove that he was. So the trial went forward. As you might imagine, this was a lot to take in for people back then. The jury wasn't sure what to make of the multiple claims. However, the judge S. Marcus Bone told the jury that they absolutely, positively had to reach a verdict because the county could not afford to go to trial again. Ultimately, the jury couldn't be sure that Franklin wasn't Franklin, so they acquitted the 4 defendants accused of his murder. But of course, debate continued to go on about whether Marion Rogers really was Connie Franklin or a very convincing liar, but we'll probably never know for sure, as Rogers or Franklin died. A Scottish folk star becomes a huge success and then disappears for 3 decades. Sheila MacDonald was a near-instant hit as a folk singer, but in 1972, right as her career was beginning to take off, MacDonald suddenly disappeared, not just from the spotlight, but from everywhere. Even collaborators and friends had no idea where she'd gone. If the internet had existed back then, rumours of MacDonald being a time traveller or part of some elaborate conspiracy would have been a trending topic, but this being the early 1970s, MacDonald simply faded into a bizarre historical footnote. However, MacDonald maintained a strong enough following that when her albums were reissued on CD in the mid-2000s, it spurred a cluster of wistful articles wondering what the hell actually happened to her. One article appeared in the Scottish Daily Mail, which found itself with an interesting postscript when a short time after running the piece, Sheila MacDonald showed up at their offices. As the understandably surprised newspaper staff listened, MacDonald explained the story behind her sudden disappearance, which was taking a load of acid. MacDonald was at a party one night when she took some LSD, which sent her on the worst trip imaginable, leaving her staggering through the streets of London, battling terrible hallucinations that lasted for weeks. It was so bad that she hopped on a plane back to Scotland to reunite with her parents, still tripping. Even when the hallucinations subsided, MacDonald found that the trip had ruined her singing voice. All she could get out was a strangled turkey. MacDonald's parents, who never wanted her to become a singer in the first place, convinced her to give up her music career, so she wound up and spent the last few decades living as a transient. MacDonald and her husband were living in a tent when she saw an article about her in the Scottish Daily Mail. She was surprised that the people were apparently still interested in her work after all these years, so she decided to resurface. MacDonald also started making music again, but here she is in 2013, giving her first public musical performance since she disappeared and was presumed dead for 4 decades earlier. But you never know, it could be Tupac's time soon. A girl presumed murdered by a serial killer is found living 2 miles away from her house. In 1998, 14-year-old Natasha Ryan vanished without explanation from her hometown Rockhampton, Australia. Her disappearance was eventually linked to Leonard Fraser, also known by the Rockhampton rapist, who was serving time in prison for the murder of the young girl. In a secretly recorded conversation with a fellow inmate, Fraser confessed to the murders of 4 girls, one of whom was Natasha Ryan. Ryan's body was never found, but after being missing for 4 years and having a convicted killer confess to her murder, nobody had any reason to doubt that she was dead. Her family held a funeral for her, and Fraser stood trial for her murder in 2003. So that should have been case closed, right? But as it turns out, Fraser wasn't being entirely truthful in his confession, which was in another way saying that Natasha Ryan wasn't dead. After receiving an anonymous tip, police raided the home of Ryan's boyfriend, Scott Black, 2.5 miles away from the house where Ryan's family lived, from which she had disappeared. They found a very much alive girl hiding inside a wardrobe. She'd been sleeping at her boyfriend's house for half a decade, just down the street from where she'd been abducted, more than happy to let her family think she'd been abducted and killed by a serial rapist. It wasn't like she was having a good time either. She had to stay inside the house at all times. In 4.5 years, she never went outside during the day. She would have to hide inside the wardrobe whenever visitors came around. Meanwhile, her boyfriend kept leading an active social life and apparently even dated Ryan's sister at one point. Ryan told the police she couldn't leave because the lie had become too big. But since Black had lied under oath about his girlfriend's disappearance, he spent a year in jail for perjury. But the couple bounced back afterwards by selling their wedding photos to a magazine for $200,000. They are still together to this day, with a son, but I assume she no longer sleeps in the wardrobe also. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, and I will catch you again next week.